My name is Megan McDonough. I'm the Executive Director at Pioneer Valley Habitat for Humanity, and I've lived in Franklin County for about 20 years now.
I'm Anna Oltman. I work for the City of Greenfield in the Community and Economic Development Department. I live in Greenfield. I was born in Greenfield but lived elsewhere for a very long time and recently moved back.
My name is Jack Redman. I'm the Executive Director at the Greenfield Housing Authority. I have been the Director at the Greenfield Housing Authority a little over a year now, and I am an East Hampton resident.
My name is Amy Kaling. I'm the Community and Economic Development Director for the City of Greenfield. I live in Northampton, right around the corner from another Habitat build.
I'm Megan Rhodes. I am a Livability Program Manager at the Franklin Regional Council of Governments, and I've been working on housing planning issues for a while now, probably since 2010-ish. So been watching things change around here in terms of housing.
I'm Susan Workafdick. I live here in Greenfield. I am a commissioner with the Greenfield Housing Authority, and I am also the chair of the Community Preservation Committee for the City of Greenfield.
Hi, I'm Ginny DeSorga. I'm the mayor of Greenfield and delighted to be here today and very concerned about housing in Greenfield. So happy to be here with all you wonderful people today.
And this morning, it's most of you guys over here, we're building a picnic table for our future homeowner. So thank you. We decided to eat inside instead of outside at the picnic table, but you did finish it, which I am super impressed that you got the whole project done this morning. The future homeowner here says she loves to eat outside with her son. So that was one of the reasons we thought that building her a picnic table, bringing together food and housing and someplace to seemed appropriate to have our lunchtime conversation here. So we're sitting in a house that's under construction. It's a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, single-story wheelchair adaptable home that's being built to Energy Star standards and zero net energy ready. But it's a simple house. It's a little bit under 1,000 square feet. And that's the sort of thing that Habitat for Humanity here in the Pioneer Valley focuses on building, simple, energy-efficient homes. But the reason we got together today was to talk not just about Pioneer Valley Habitat and what we do here in Franklin County, but about rural housing more broadly. So across the country today, there are over 60 rural rallies happening with different Habitat for Humanity affiliates across the country. There's also a really big project happening in Texas that is part of the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter Work Project Week. They have been huge advocates for the work of Habitat for Humanity before President Carter passed away this year. I think up until the pandemic, they had both been volunteering every year into their 80s and being such amazing advocates for housing. So we are part of that larger conversation of, housing happening. And come on in, Alyssa. This is
Yes.
an informal Franklin County gathering.
Yeah, Alyssa LaRose. I work for the Franklin County Regional Housing and Redevelopment Authority as a housing development director for our development projects, which are done through our nonprofit, Rural Development, Inc.
That's what it takes to get the housing done.
There we go. A lot of words there.
And he's a
Sorry.
neighbor.
And I live across the street.
How wonderful is that?
Yeah, it's pretty
How
cool.
wonderful is that?
Yeah.
What a great neighborhood.
Yes, I love it.
Since we're here in Franklin County, Massachusetts, rural part of the state, Megan, can you tell us a little bit about what the challenges have been with housing here in our neck of the woods?
Yes, there's a couple of things, kind of a little story I want to paint for Franklin County. Really what's been happening here in the region, the overwhelming trend is that we just don't have enough housing, and we have not been creating enough housing really since the 2000s. Because of that, we have the lowest vacancy rate in the state at around 0%. Some say around 1.3, and that's generously high, but a lot of our towns are around 0 to 0.1%, which means there's really no room for people to, if you want to change your situation, if your family's gotten larger or smaller, or your income has changed, there's nothing for you to move into to change that situation. It also means that we can't have new people come to our area because there's just no homes available. So because we have not been creating enough housing in really about 20 or so years, we have a very tight supply, and that supply is actually also threatened by the fact that we have some of the oldest housing stock in the state. So we're constantly just trying to keep the housing we have, but we also do need to increase and build more housing. And so because of that really tight supply, and the demand is high, prices have gone up. So we have very high unaffordability here in the region. Across both here in Greenfield and in Franklin County, over half of our renters and homeowners are paying too much for housing. It's just unaffordable. And in fact, if you make the median income and you want to purchase a house, the median price that's available is actually $200,000 more than what someone can afford, making the median income. And that gap between what you can afford and what you are able to afford or what's available is just been increasing year after year since COVID, really. So we, in the Franklin Regional Council of Governments, did a study last year, and we identified that there's currently a gap of 3,200 units of housing that is affordable to current residents. So
That's for Franklin
that's a
County.
shortage in Franklin County
Of what?
of 3,200 units that's affordable to people who live here right now. So there's about 3,000 households that are paying too much for housing costs. And so that's a pretty severe gap. And when you look at demographic trends, we also need additional housing. We need UMass Donahue Institute just released a study actually last month that shows that in Franklin County, to put people into homes, we need additional 2,200 units in the next 10 years. And that doesn't even look at whether they're affordable or not. We just need 2,200 units to accommodate the number of people that will be living here in 10 years. And what's really interesting about Franklin County in our rural area is that our population is doing something very interesting demographically. We are losing population, so you might think that because we're declining in population, total population, we're like, oh, well, we don't actually need to build more housing because it's going to solve itself because we're not going to have enough people. Actually, the way it's working is we are declining in population, and there is a graphic, I think, in your...
Yeah, it's in that handout.
Yeah, there's... The very top slide has a little picture of some families and fit people, and it shows how our demographics are changing, why we're going to need more households. Basically, 10 years ago, we had a family of 4 living in a single family home. Now that same home only has 2 people. The empty nesters living in it. One adult child has moved out to stay in an apartment, and that other second child has left the state entirely. So we lost population in that scenario, and we actually added from 1 household to 2 households. And that's the trend that's been happening all over. And so our population, while it is declining, is spreading out into more households, which means we need more housing.
Fewer people, more housing.
Yeah, so it's hard to kind of wrap around, but that is the trend, which is why we need more housing, even than what we have now today.
What you mentioned about just the fact that we have so little housing stock available, it's restricting the ability for people to move here. And so we've heard from employers that they have trouble hiring because people can't find housing who want to move here and take those jobs. So it's partly like a self-fulfilling prophecy that we'll continue to lose population if we're not building more housing.
Yeah, and there's usually like a kind of a chicken and egg thing with economic development and housing. You know, which do you need first? And the answer is both. You can't have one without the other. In fact, a successful, thriving community I think of it as a stool with 3 legs. One is housing, one's economic development, and one's transportation. In order to have a thriving community, you really have to work on all 3 of those at the same time, and you can't have one without the other. So there's a couple of themes that we've identified as to why we're in this situation. Why haven't we been creating enough housing? Why aren't we, why do we have unaffordable housing? One is we do have limited infrastructure. We don't have a lot of public water and sewer in Franklin County, and that's true for many rural areas. And so it tends to be more expensive and kind of a little less dependable if you have to build on septic. So that is a constraint that we have. Another issue is we are in a weaker market, so that when private developers come in, because we have such very low incomes, in fact the lowest incomes in the state, we can't charge very high rents or sell homes for very much. So there's really not a lot of return on investment for private developers to come in and build new homes. We also have this aging housing stock, and so kind of underwater, constantly kind of threatened with just loss of housing. We gotta make sure we replace the housing that is aging. And we do have a lot of zoning in many of our towns that's not necessarily friendly to different types of homes other than single-family homes on large lots. And our market studies show that in order to attract new people here, to keep people in the region, young adults from leaving, we need to have starter homes. We need to have smaller homes like townhouses, apartments. That's kind of really essential to keep that younger population here and attract new ones to the region. And so we really need to make sure that our zoning reflects what our population actually needs. And then lastly, we do have state programs and fundings that don't really reflect what we need in our rural region. They're very Boston focused. And so I know that there's regional partners in the room and elsewhere that have been working hard to try and change the formulas and grant funding programs to reflect what our needs are. And hopefully we'll start making a change there. That is a very quick picture. Happy to delve into any questions or details if people want to talk about those.
And anecdotally, I also hear that accessible housing is even harder,
Yes.
even shorter supply.
Yeah,
That as our population is aging, the demand for single-story living or aging in place is going up, but there just isn't anywhere to go.
40% of our housing was built before 1940. So none of that's going to be accessible.
Yeah.
I do feel that recently we made some significant changes to the zoning that made it more amenable to housing developments, and yet there is some resistance to amongst the, some individuals. I was on planning for 6 years, and many times you go to planning board meetings and you would meet resistance with any developments that were coming through. And that is unfortunate. Only one planning board meeting that I attended were people coming to the meeting and saying, yes, let's have this come. And that's what we need. We need, more education, things like this, where you're pointing out the need for this. I live on Silvercrest Lane, and I heard when that development was coming in that, people were resistant to that. That, life as we knew it was going to end when that development went in. It was going to be the end of Western civilization with all of the traffic that was going to go onto Silver Street, and that did not happen. And we have to welcome new things that come to places because we need more housing.
Well, it is really interesting that, housing advocacy can happen at that state and the national level, for state laws, but that ultimately homes are built in places and that in our local communities. And, it's one of the things I appreciate about the work I get to do with Habitat is that it's very human scaled. You guys got out a saw and hammered this morning and did something for one of your neighbors. And, it's a big problem. There's thousands of units. We're building one here on the street, which we're very proud of. It's an infill lot. It's, all these great things, an existing neighborhood. But how do we continue to advocate for housing across our communities? What are some of the things that you are seeing in your work?
I'll give a shout out to Susan. I think Greenfield, one of the reasons why we have so much housing in the pipeline and why I feel supported and empowered to advocate for housing at the city level is because we do have a really strong existing group of community members who aren't necessarily doing housing as their day job, but who care about growing the housing stock in Greenfield and who get together regularly and talk about how they can support that. And I think that's really boots on the ground needed.
Right. Here, here.
And I think part of the reason that this has happened is because we have a very concerned community that really understands the needs of their neighbors. And that's a really big thing. We have 96 people on our list, most of them living in Greenfield. And the discussion includes everything from folks who are living on the street right now and how do we make sure they're safe and warm in the wintertime and cool in the summertime, to how do we build more housing. And the partnerships that we've had with Rural Development Inc., with Habitat, with all of the possible developers locally has been really helpful. Because we are a part of it. We have said to people like, you need more accessible housing on that. You know, this is a problem. We need that. So that we've been able to have dialogues about those questions and been able to move that forward. So it's a real partnership in the town, I think, around the question of housing.
Speaking of partnerships, I keep wondering is who haven't we tapped into as partners or allies? Because I feel like we need to spread out the support and get everyone who we can, who may not normally think of in terms of who can support our housing. Because not only do we need projects to be built, but we also need zoning to be changed. There's a lot of opportunities for people to lend their voice and say, yeah, that's a really good one, but maybe we haven't heard from them.
Oh, I can think of a whole. We don't have that kind of time.
Who
but,
haven't we talked to?
the ones that are coming to my mind immediately, I think the business community, broadly speaking, in particular, the companies up in the industrial park that do stuff that nobody really knows what they do, but it's manufacturing and that sort of thing.
Right.
Their employers are the ones who can't find housing. Also, GCC to a certain extent, but the 5 colleges. It would be great to be able to retain students here, and they could be a more vocal advocate for housing in the community. And Bay State is the other one coming to mind that they're physicians and nurses and doctors. Many of them, I would imagine, live in our community or would like to live in our community but can't find housing. Yeah. And it would be great to see them at the table.
I think there's also a need to re-envision downtown. One of the things is that we've always looked at it as, okay, the storefronts are stores. We may not, there's been a big change. Amazon has changed our lives. COVID has changed our lives. And I think we need to look more broadly at what should be in those storefronts. And I'm thinking it's something Amy and I have talked about. Because we're in a very educational rich area, I would love to see some of those storefronts used for startup businesses coming out of UMass, coming out of some of the colleges. I used to work at UMass. When I would talk to people about where I lived and what I did, they would talk about building new businesses south, east, west. They wouldn't talk about moving north. And I think that this is an opportunity for us, because we have some openings in the business district, to be able to really bring some of those folks in and have those businesses start with us. They may not stay with us forever, but they would start with us and they would support the other businesses in the area, the food store, the restaurants, what have you. And so that's something that I would really like to see. And that also relates to having housing for them to live in here.
Yeah. I think I was at a recent SEDS meeting, and I think some of the challenges that new businesses have in setting up shop in Franklin County are actually very similar to new housing development, in terms of it's very costly right now. That's one of our biggest challenges, is just the cost of construction, the cost of development. And so when you have really kind of unclear permitting paths and extra requests that it's unclear, is this code or is this just what you want to see, that add cost to a project, it makes it really hard. And so in the same way that with economic development, we look at trying to make our communities more business friendly, like what you're saying with changing zoning and things like that, we also need to look at our regulations and how do we become more housing friendly, with the understanding that the more requirements and the more asks that you're putting on developers, the harder it is to actually going to have a feasible project, because the costs right now are just out of control.
And I think that parallel holds true in the grant and funding space,
Yeah.
in terms of the challenges that we see in trying to make Boston-based housing grant funding work for housing is very similar in the economic development space, but they don't understand what a business looks like out here as opposed to, yeah.
And so what do you guys think is unique about the rural environment where, I mean, we're in the city of Greenfield, I know, but we're in rural Franklin County here. You know, how is it the same and different, you know, to be trying to advocate for housing in a rural community?
Scale. Scale 100%. Scale in terms of what works for funding. Scale in terms of what makes an impact out here. I think a housing development that would be a game changer for Greenfield wouldn't even make a place like Brookline blink.
Right.
And I don't think there's a total appreciation for that.
Yeah.
Yep.
This is why she's so good at what she does.
One of the big constraints is septic, the fact that we don't have public sewer in most of our communities. And right now, the septic Title V regulations at the state level are universal for the entire state, despite the fact that we have regional differences in terms of soil conditions and water tables and things like that. And I think having recognition of the fact that there's differences could make things a lot easier, particularly, you know, if you're doing little things like ADUs, accessory dwelling units. Right now, if you're wanting to build one and you're on septic, you basically have to upgrade your entire septic system, according to current regulations. And so if we could get some flexibility with things like that, that's maybe one accessory dwelling here and there. It doesn't seem like a lot, but for a rural region like Franklin County, that actually could really move the needle. And particularly for an aging population like we have, that's a really great way to provide nice housing that's accessible for older adults. So little
That
things
fits
like
into existing neighborhoods.
exactly, yeah, it fits in with the rural character. It doesn't really make a difference in terms of obviously what you're seeing.
Yeah.
And that, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna build off of, for affordable housing at least, as Megan knows, there's a huge, dearth of, there's no funding, basically, for projects that fit in most of our towns. It just doesn't exist for homeownership. It doesn't exist at all for rental. It's incredibly difficult to make a project feasible that's under 20 units. And so that's a huge issue. And there's also just a lack of recognition on the state level of some of those additional costs, like septic and well, or just site costs that we run into with trying to develop in rural areas that you're not going to see in an infill project where there's already water, sewer, a road, a sidewalk, etc. And so I find that that's just a huge challenge.
And if we're looking to change the attitudes of neighbors, the one thing you don't want to do is set up a system where everybody who has been living there for the last 20 years cannot use that system. So setting up a sewer system for the one big project in town where everybody else has to pay for it as well is not something that makes any sense at all. So building that kind of, how do we do this all together and really see it as a growth issue is important in terms of having that, losing that not in my backyard, you know, not this is too expensive, this is too hard for us, we don't want to do it kind of feeling that many neighbors have.
Well, to your point, that's a kind of a very common myth that we hear a lot in rural areas like this, is the cost of housing to things like your sewer, to the schools, to your tax base. But actually, because of our declining population, it's really essential and critical that we get more people in new homes here to actually defray those costs. Because, for instance, for a school, if you have a declining enrollment, you still have to have a principal, you still have to have a cafeteria, you still have to have school. But if we have less students in there, it's more expensive. And so we need to refill those schools back up to help with those costs. Same with sewer. A lot of our towns, our sewer plants were built for paper mills and factories, which are no longer using as much water. And so it actually is really helpful to put more units online to help defray those costs and keep those facilities running.
You know, you talked a little bit about funding, Alyssa, and so, you know, Habitat for Humanity, Pioneer Valley Habitat for Humanity, we build typically smaller projects, you know, one house, we've got a 6-unit project plan for Montague, and we do that primarily through small grants and community donations. And that's because there isn't a lot of big state funding for these types of projects. You know, we're applying for one state-funded grant, and you know, trying to make it happen. But whenever there's this sort of community outpouring of support, you know, it happens in many different ways. Thank you for joining the conversation.
I have to go for something else. Thank you all so much.
Yeah, so glad you could be here. And I'll try and watch the time here, make sure I don't make us go over too. But yeah, so there's not an easy answer to any of this. You know, I did hear, you know, some advocacy at the state level for different and rural, the cornerstone communities was something that you, FERCOG has been talking about.
Yeah, that's basically a designation. So right now there's a couple of categories in which communities get designated in special categories that receive my extra points on grant programs. There's a seasonal communities, there's gateway cities. They're recognized as having special conditions in which they might need a little bit of extra help, and they can get extra help through a variety of maybe extra funding or points on grant programs, things like that. And so the FERCOG and our delegation has been advocating for a cornerstone community designation, and that is for rural small towns with weaker markets like ours to have that acknowledgement that our scales are different, our numbers are different, and in order for us to make progress, we need a little bit of extra help to do our part for the state as well. So hopefully, I have heard some positive things coming down from the state on that, but we'll see what happens there.
All right, what other questions do we have here? How are we going to make some more housing happen? I know.
I do, yeah.
Go for it.
I do think it's talking to your neighbors and getting your people excited when you're out, you're you know, getting your hair done or at the dentist. Just, you know, talking about them about the local projects or why that zoning actually changed is really important. Making it relatable and personable, I think, is kind of like the lowest barrier and easiest thing. I say easy, but easiest thing to do to really make change, which I think we really need to start giving people the ammunition and the information necessary to be like, actually, I think that's a good project, and here's why, when you're sitting on the sidelines of your soccer team type of thing.
Yeah, I think some of the attitudes are changing organically because, as you said, the crisis is at a true crisis point. Like an almost 0% vacancy rate means someone like me who had never really had an expertise in housing became a housing expert for my own reasons because I couldn't find a place to live. And I think people are starting to notice their family members getting priced out or friends and family. So then the question is, how do you give them the information they need to push back against the narratives that aren't true?
Yeah, and I'm finding that, I mean, we've had tremendous support for some of our recent projects. You know, for instance, in Irving, that's really a collaboration with the town, and it's been really driven by a committee of committed volunteers over years and years and years of trying to create housing in that town. And so they're doing exactly that. They're talking to neighbors and people on election day and things like that. I think the other connection piece that needs to be made as more and more people are understanding the need and understanding the crisis is then the well, what can we do about it? And so that's where I think FERCOG obviously is critical in helping towns. You know, it's hard for a volunteer planning board to look at their zoning and totally know, like, okay, like I think this is what can happen, but it's hard to know, like, what are the barriers, and so then really actually digging in to identify what needs to change, you know, in those regulations and things like that. Is the next step.
think some humanizing. I think at the city level, we fall victim to this a lot, where we talk about housing in terms of units and zoning and setbacks and whatever. And the reality is that it's families that are going to be our neighbors and make our communities grow. And I think I try to be a little conscious of not dipping into that unit speak. Because I just don't think it's anywhere near as compelling to talk about 21 units. It makes it much easier to push back against that, but not if it's a family.
Good lesson for me.
I think, I think
Right there with you.
one of the other things is that as we have had these questions come before us, and right now we're dealing with a referendum here in Greenfield, as you know, people have started telling their own stories. And one of the things that has been really impactful has been the number of different ways that people see the need for housing. So it's everything from, I got adult kids who can't afford their apartment, or who are going to be forced to move out of town, or that kind of thing, to people saying, we need younger people here to be able to build the economy. We need younger people to be able to do different kinds of work. Where are all our plumbers going to come from? All that kind of question. And so it gets people to start thinking. I think there was a period of time, especially in some of the towns around us, where people said, oh, the schools are too expensive, we're not going to build any more housing because we don't want any more kids here. And I think now people are starting to say, wait a minute, this is not working because we're all going to die off, and who's going to be here? And those are real factors in a lot of these towns.
Yeah, no, I live in one of those small towns where they're talking about school closures and, consolidation because there aren't enough kids to support the school system. And, and it's pretty, when I saw some of the statistics on how few kids were in the school system, I was pretty astounded. 5 towns, 800 kids, kindergarten through 12th grade. I was like, okay, that's not very many. So it's hard to run 5 buildings. So those are, I guess, part of the rural challenges, because you also don't want those kids on buses for 2 hours just to go to school. You want your neighborhoods and your communities, and a lot of us moved to this area because it's beautiful out here, the people are nice, it's not actually that far from other resources. So, how can we uplift to those wonderful qualities of our rural communities and that neighborliness that exists out there? And I do think we see that. I mean, we have hundreds of volunteers for Habitat that show up and build houses for their neighbors, and sometimes I think it is that problem that you're talking about, Alyssa, that the question of, well, what can I do to help with that problem? And, so I do think that Habitat is one way for someone to take that next step and say, okay, well, I can't afford to build someone a house, but I can contribute towards Habitat building a house. I can contribute my time or my resources or my support at a planning board meeting. And that is that community coming together. And I do think that that's very strong here in our rural communities.
The FERCog's website, we have been adding a lot of resources there. So if people are like, oh, what is the numbers? What is like a quick stat that I can use if I am going to be talking to someone, or if I do want to go to a public hearing for a zoning change or something? There is a lot of information there that it's not, we've been trying to be very good about not making it too technical, not making it too unity, but making it more relatable and understandable and easy to understand, so that you can take that information and go and say, actually, here's why we need this. Here's, making it relatable here to Franklin County. So that it's a good resource to let people know about.
Yeah, I guess I'm a planner, and so I talk in planning speak a lot, and I know that when I was in grad school, I feel like at that time there was a shift. I went to UMass, and so there was more of a focus on not just urban planning, but rural. And, we were coming out of several decades of pretty rapid growth in this region, largely due to things like UMass Amherst growing and things like that. And so the focus of communities was more around growth management or even just stopping that growth, because we have those bylaws in some of our towns of just like, we can't issue more than 5 building permits a year. And I think certainly since the Great Recession, I mean, there needs to be a shift to the whole smart growth, which again, I know that's planning terms, where we can develop in a more sustainable way in our communities. We can pair, housing with open space development and things like that, to achieve both goals of having these, vibrant, healthy, rural communities that allow for some new growth. And so the tools are there. It's just getting them in place and then making the economics work.
Right, I think it's
That's all we
important
have to do, right?
to think strategically about how growth will happen. We know we need growth, but making sure we do it in a way that's not just sprawl subdivisions everywhere. And it is totally possible with the right zoning tools and the right leadership.
Zoning is kind of one of those funny things that's like very wonky, but also totally local. In Massachusetts, every single community in the state has its own zoning bylaws, which is kind of amazing and crazy at the same time. So there are some state laws that have changed recently that affect zoning, like allowing accessory dwelling units to be by right in any single-family home district. But there's still the complication in our rural communities around things like septic. So is anyone seeing any movement on, helping assist people do those accessory dwelling units?
The state is providing some resources. They're coming up with designs right now that they're hoping will be kind of pre-approved by planning boards. If you choose this design, then you should be able to have a pretty smooth permitting process. So trying to cut that red tape on that. The state is also looking generally as an acknowledgement that we have a lot of bureaucracy in the state and red tape. So not just accessory dwelling units, but they're looking at ways to how can we streamline that to produce more housing. And so there's a lot of different processes that they're really looking at in terms of the building code and some environmental permitting, that there might be ways to make it a little bit faster so that more housing can get done without the expense of having to go through a lot of red tape.
And there's limited right now, but the home modification loan program, if you qualify for that, adding an accessory dwelling unit is an eligible expense. But I think that the cost of building an ADU is a huge barrier. And so it'd be great to see resources out there, especially for, say, a low-income homeowner, to maybe get a 0 interest, deferred interest deferred payment loan to do an ADU, something like that.
Part of the state regulations, they did make it very explicit that you can use modular or manufactured housing as accessory dwelling units, and those cut the cost in half. And so that's something we, I think, need to think more about. How can we facilitate the production of modular homes here in the region?
I'd love to see a warehouse-style manufacturing of small modular out here.
Just really say another
great
rural
location.
thing,
Right.
because I think those are all located Eastern Mass, and so.
Or out of state,
Or
just
out.
because
So
it's
New Hampshire,
expensive to have a production facility in Massachusetts. So we're doing a modular project, and I believe their factory's in Maine. But we've
Not
heard of
Pennsylvania? Most modular
most, I
factories.
was about to say most are Pennsylvania, and I might be wrong about that. So
Yeah, we're perfect situated with I-91 and Route 2, and we've got space for facilities. It would be a fantastic job creator and home creator.
So we just need housing for the people who want to work there.
You're right.
Well, I know that there was a project a few years ago in Vermont after Tropical Storm Irene, which I guess I'm dating myself because that was like 11 years ago, wasn't it? Where the Vermont the Investment Corporation came up with mobile home replacement modular homes that would be energy efficient, and they started and a private company developed to try and build those. And I visited their factory, and it was basically a warehouse where they were building indoors. So for smaller scale housing, with the new ADU bylaw, that is something that is potentially possible. But like you said, regulations to be a modular developer is a whole nother thing.
Yeah, and modular homes are, do qualify for, they're considered a single-family home under Massachusetts Building Code. Manufactured home is a different story.
As long as they're affixed to a permanently to a foundation, then they're
Yeah.
a single-family home,
Okay.
year-round seasonal. The financing is a little different, but they are considered a year-round residential unit.
The code is just different because it's HUD code versus
The way
local
it's
code.
constructed is,
Yeah.
but the HUD code, if it's built to the HUD code and it's affixed to a permanent foundation, then under Massachusetts Building Code, it is a year-round,
Got it, yeah.
single-family home.
So part of it is to make sure that we have the financing for that, and that in part means working with our business community to try to get that to happen. Because I think that I think the banks here are pretty good at trying to be supportive, but if there's a combination of education of the community and education of the business community, we can make some of that happen more quickly, I think.
Yeah, we're lucky to live in a community that has supportive businesses and banks that want to see a lot of this happening. So I think that, there's limited resources all around. There's only so far each thing can go, but I think we're continuing to talk about how do you amplify and not recreate the wheel, but learn from other states, learn from other parts of Massachusetts so that we can figure out the best ways to make the biggest impact. I know Habitat tried a modular project, but we're kind of a funny animal because most of our general carpentry is done by volunteers. It wasn't more cost effective for us because what you save on modular is time and the labor, and we had already been saving on labor.
That makes sense.
But when I look at our 5-year, 10-year plan for how many houses we're going to build, there's sort of 3 main factors that I look at, which is land, volunteers, and money. And finding land has actually become harder and harder. We're looking at more building lots that have difficult stormwater or wetlands issues to overcome, or just complicated legal histories with paper streets or other things. This lot is kind of our ideal. It's a small infill lot. There was a previous home here that was demolished because it had been abandoned, and now we're moving into an existing neighborhood. I'd love to find more lots like this. I don't know how to, but I'd also love it if there were people who had big lots that maybe zoning's changed over the years and now their side yard is big enough to be a building lot. It doesn't have to be much. It can be 8,000 square feet or 10,000 square feet, and it still could be enough if there's water and sewer. Back to the septic.
Will you guys build a septic?
We do, so we've built homes in Conway and some of the Pelham and some of the other rural communities around the area. But the size of the lot often is a factor for septic.
Yeah, I mean, it's the expense of lead paint, especially given the age of our housing stock, and there's really no exemption, even if it's not a home with small children. And just the expense in general. It's just a lot, and so it's doable, but the funds that a city like Greenfield has will maybe give us a couple of units rehab each year.
The hardest part right now I've seen is our rental units. Our small landlords, they have really old buildings and they're very affordable because they're not in great shape. They have lead paint or they really need to be renovated. But the problem is the funding is not really enough to justify, they'd have to move people out of the units, you have to cover those costs, you then have to do the upgrades. And if you are doing 3 or more units, you have to put sprinkler systems in. It's like a cascade of expenses. And there are grants available, but sometimes they require you to keep them at affordable rates, and the landlord may not be interested in that, even though they want
to monitor it too.
And so there's a lot of red tape and bureaucracy that goes with that, and that's a really big problem for our rental population.
Yeah, our CDBG program, which is not RDI, it's HRA program. So I can't speak to too many details, but we do a lot of single-family owner-occupied rehab through CDBG, which has been a successful model that we've done for over several decades. And so that work continues, and I know we have existing grants and programs in a number of towns. But yeah, the big gap is with the small scale investor owned properties, the multifamily properties. We've never done any of those, I believe. I think we've done a few owner occupied multifamily. But yeah, they don't, the complications of the CDBG program and the need to continually monitor and place a deed restriction for like 15 years is just way more than what any of our landlords are willing to take on to do those upgrades. So that's a huge issue. And for us, we rehabbed, RDI rehabbed, we're trying to work with towns like the city of Greenfield and Montague through the receivership program to target abandoned properties, specifically single-family homes. And the cost of rehabbing a home that's been sitting for 5 or 10 years is just huge. So it's almost, or it is in some cases, more cost-effective to just tear down an existing home and build new. Though we've tried, we successfully renovated one property, but certainly we find lead and asbestos pretty much in every house we go into.
And they, you know,
it's
there's,
expensive.
yeah, and there's the addition that since all these houses are old, they need new wiring. They need, you know, so it's not
Yeah.
a simple case of, okay, if we get the lead and asbestos done, we're fine.
Right.
Because they need to be insulated, they need new wiring. It's a major, there's a reason why these houses were abandoned, you know, that the people who owned them, it wasn't simply that they walked away because they said, I just don't want to own a house in Greenfield. It was, they recognized that they did not have the wherewithal to be able to make this house habitable in a significant way. And so they just walked away. And that's a real difficulty because we do have houses that, you know, I get people saying to me, well, what about the house on, you know, that street? And it's like, yeah, that would be great, except, you know, this is the kind of cost it's going to be if you want to, and that's not affordable for most of the people who could live in it.
Yeah, and the other real concern for me there is, you know, is that people are living in substandard housing. And, you know, you don't want to deny someone the ability to have a roof over their head, but if that roof is leaking, there's health and safety concerns. So, you know, how do we support our neighbors, you know, who are struggling and getting by as best they can in some of this housing stock that's aging around them?
Yeah, and I think the struggle too with something like that is there's probably 57 things wrong and they can probably afford to fix one.
Right.
But if they fix the one that needs the building inspector to come in and okay that one, they're not going to want to risk having to do
Triggers
everything
everything
else.
else.
And, yeah, so
So maybe,
I don't know.
you know, I think the CDBG funded program that you're talking about that does code repairs, you know, is really critical for a lot of these homeowners, you know, to do that thing that's going to keep their house safe. And I'd love to see that sort of funding, you know, with forgivable deferred loans, you know, expanded. But it also seems like needs to be something that happens when houses are in transition, you know, when there's that moment when it's abandoned, like the receivership program, so that we can rescue those so his beautiful old houses or their land or, you know, whatever it may be in the situation.
I was going to say, I think, though, to get back to what Megan was talking about in the beginning, because of household composition changing, a lot of this is all interconnected. So you have a 100-year-old home that used to be a family of 4. Now there's one homeowner left. There's 55 things to fix. They certainly can't fix it. Our subsidized housing, affordable housing lists are exhaustive. It can take someone 3 to 5 years easily. And so if that person can maintain the home, something like the ADU, putting the ADU there, renovating the house, that person now potentially has income, and someone who actually needs a 4-bedroom house could move in. But to renovate and deal with lead paint when you're talking about a 3 or 4-bedroom home that will need that lead paint removed, it just all comes back together, unfortunately, where you need 5 different programs to address this one situation, but it also goes down to population again. It's a big circle that we need to find. How can we help all 5 of those problems for that one individual who will also create another place for people to live?
One of the things in the state plan that they've talked about is that they're looking at those kinds of questions. I think the thing that we need to do is to make them aware of what it would take for us to be able to solve those questions. And I think that that's a piece that we're starting to get better at, but we're not as good as we need to be. And part of that issue is because we are a small population as well as a poor population. And when it comes to votes in the State House, we don't carry the kind of weight that I would like us to carry. But I think that we need to work with our legislators to say this is what we need, and to have it very clear this is what we need. And because I think we've got a good legislative team here that would be helpful with us if we could we need to figure out the specifics on that.
One of the frustrating things I find is, there's always strings attached with funding sources, which I understand, especially if it's public money. But a lot of times, each individual source just has so many silly requirements, and it can make it hard. And so definitely having something that's more flexible, funding that's more flexible, that could cover multiple different types of situations, it would just be wonderful.
All right. I'm with you with that.
Can I do one positive thing?
Yes, please.
Let's all do one positive thing here. So,
I just want to highlight the work of Habitat, because
Yes.
we've talked about the fact that the Housing Authority has a homeownership program, and Megan alluded to the fact that the average home price is around $400,000. Our folks who have the capability of actually affording a house with home ownership just unfortunately can't get to that $400 price point. But with a Habitat home, somewhere around $200,000, it actually works for their income, for their long-term benefits. So the model that you have is a wonderful model that does help with labor costs that Alyssa and I can't touch in our trying to do developments, but it just really works. And so we appreciate everything that Habitat's doing, because the opportunity there for our people we are trying to help really is possible with your model.
thank you. Yeah. And the positive thing that I wanted to talk about was, I think Franklin County is a very collaborative space. And I think you're illustrating that too, so you've taken the extra effort to make a home ownership voucher, your 5 things and the statistic, that need to happen. We're willing to talk about it. We may not have all the answers here today, but these are the conversations where we start to go, okay, how are these different things connected? You can run a home ownership voucher program, but you need to have a house that people can afford.
Exactly.
And to help someone stay in there who's aging in place but wants an accessible unit, there has to be a shorter waiting list in the apartments. And all of these issues are interdependent and interconnected, just like we are as people in our neighborhoods and our communities, interdependent and interconnected. So thank you guys for taking time out of your busy days today to talk about housing, one of my favorite topics. But, and clearly there's a lot of expertise in our community and a lot of people with lived experience who can inform all of these discussions as well. And so let's keep having these conversations and keep people in their homes and build some more housing.
Indeed. Thank you. Thank you for bringing